So shall we get started? Sure. Sounds good, right? 2 o'clock, a little bit after 2. Hello everybody and welcome to Making Transit-Oriented Development a Reality. My name is John Flaherty and I'm Deputy Director at Grow Smart Rhode Island. And we're glad that there's as much interest in this as there is. And I wanted to just start off by offering a word of thanks to the Division of Planning. The Land Use Training Collaborative, which we operate, is funded in part by the Division of Planning, and this workshop is part of our work plan for this year. There's been a lot of interest in transit-oriented development. Also, a word about Grow Smart. So for folks that don't know about Grow Smart Rhode Island, we are a non-profit, non-partisan organization, public interest research group, focused primarily on policies related to supporting strong, vibrant, and sustainable communities. Transit-oriented development fits into that. And so if you're interested in knowing a little bit more about Grow Smart, in the back of the room we have a briefing book that we produce every 2 years around the election cycle. We don't back candidates, but we do take positions on matters of policy, and this book sort of knits them all together in a cohesive way. So it's about revitalized urban and town centers. It's about expanded transportation choices. It's about thoughtful development of renewable energy, which is an issue that has become a very important one across the state in the last couple of years. Anyway, you can feel free to take one of those with you as well. So before introducing our speakers, I think it's important that we define this topic that we're going to be talking about today, transit-oriented development. Provide some context to guide our discussion. So in terms of what is TOD? I mean, people may have different impressions of it based on places that they've visited and experienced, but at its core, transit-oriented development is a type of development that includes a mixture of housing, office, commercial, retail, amenities, very important, integrated into a walkable neighborhood, and very importantly, with access to high quality, high frequency public transportation. From our perspective at Grow Smart, we also think it's essential that it create better access to jobs, housing, and opportunity for people of all ages and income. So it leads to the question, why even bother with this? Why pursue it? Well, first of all, it doesn't take much effort to look around the country and see that the market for transit-oriented development is very strong. Whether it's, I mean, you can look at one of the most high-profile corporate relocations, the Amazon second headquarters, which was always a long shot. Many cities put in bids. But the important thing about their RFP is that if you looked at it, having high-quality public transportation was not a nice amenity. It was part of their core requirement. So if you didn't have that, I think the message they were sending is don't even bother, because it comes down to their ability to recruit and retain talent. And when you think about the workforce that's emerging and what demands they have, it used to be that folks would go to where a company is located to get the job, and increasingly it's the companies that are locating where the talent is. And so for places that want to be more competitive, these are some of the things that they must consider. How do you set that table to make an attractive environment to attract people in business? Housing is another important consideration. A couple of years ago, Housing Works Rhode Island completed a study on our housing need in the state and concluded that Rhode Island, we haven't been building housing, we haven't been issuing permits for housing anywhere close to the levels that we had just a few years ago. I think the number of permits issued annually is something like under 1,000. And they determined that Rhode Island needs approximately 40,000 units of housing between now and 2025, just to meet the existing demand and the forecasted demand. And interestingly, the biggest segment of that housing need is in multifamily, not in single family. So the question then is, where are we going to accommodate all this housing that we need? And we think that TOD presents a really good opportunity for that. Also, sustainability, becoming more and more important. And we're talking about things like reducing greenhouse gas emissions and congestion, and the transportation sector, as we know it today, is both the single largest and the fastest growing contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. So unless we fundamentally change that sector, we're not going to be making much progress when it comes to addressing climate change. And then finally, it's about taking advantage of opportunity. Most communities have a place that lends itself to transit-oriented development. We're going to hear from some of those today. And it's in many ways taking things that are areas that may be liabilities, where there's not been a lot happening, where there was disinvestment over the years, where there's a lot of surface parking, and turning those into opportunities for investment. So those are some of the reasons. One other thing that you may have been hearing about lately is that Rhode Island's actually at risk of losing a congressional seat, in part because our population has remained somewhat stagnant while other parts of the country have seen increases. And so what does that mean for us in Rhode Island if that happens? And how do we continue to attract and retain people living and working here? And we think that when you look across the state, these opportunities that exist throughout the state for more thoughtful transit-oriented development require some attention. And I'm actually happy to say that we've been working with a number of communities that have interest in this, and we're going to hear a little bit more about that through one of our speakers in a moment. So what are the ingredients? What are the things that what makes for TOD? I'll just mention a few of them. There's certainly more, but one of them is the development or redevelopment opportunities that exist within a community. You need to have that in order to be able to accommodate TOD. Having walkable, compact sites with access or potential access to high-quality, high-frequency public transportation is obviously you can't have TOD without the T. Having either the existence or the potential for access to amenities, the kinds of things that people are looking for within the areas that they're going to live or work that make it attractive. And then finally, it's the market. I think you'll hear a lot about that from one of our speakers. The real estate demand. We are in a fairly good economic position right now. Some people are thinking that we may be headed for the next dip. But obviously, in order to pursue and succeed with TOD, there needs to be market demand. And let's not forget about Boston being as close as it is to Rhode Island. That's a red-hot real estate market, and there may be opportunities to benefit from that. One final bit of context to keep in mind: when we talk about TOD, there are no two TOD sites that are the same, or opportunities. Right? So there's an issue of scale. There's also, when you talk about the development timetable, there's a lot of variables that determine how and when TOD can actually flourish. And we're going to talk about many of those today. That's really one of the purposes of this workshop. So, in terms of the different types of TOD, one of the things we can look at is what's happening right now in downtown Providence. So Rhode Island does have at least one very active TOD location, and that is the area, the quarter to a half-mile area around Providence Station. When you consider the cranes that are on our skyline, which there are more these days, they're almost all right within that area. And so some of the things we talked about in terms of market demand and the access to transit can be found there. So if we want to compare, say, Providence Station and the level of transit that exists there and the development opportunities with some of the other sites around the state that may not have that frequency of service, that's an important consideration. And this all comes at a really important time because Rhode Island is undertaking right now the first ever transit master plan statewide. So it's just beginning. There's going to be a series of some public open houses next week in Providence and in Woonsocket and in Newport. And this is an opportunity for people to express what it is that they're looking for in a transit system. And I think it's the first real significant opportunity to envision, what do we want when we grow up when it comes to how our transit system works, and the opportunities that it may present for communities that are embracing the opportunity for TOD. So, with that, I'm going to introduce our speakers, and I won't go through all their bios, but we do have everyone's bios on the sheet in the back of the room. Maybe you already picked one up. But leading us off is going to be Dan Egan, and Dan is the senior planner for the City of Warwick. Warwick is one of the first communities that really got into TOD planning, and so they've done a lot of the heavy lifting and the planning and the zone changing that's necessary to set the table for private investment. And we'll hear more from Dan about when Warwick got started and the patience that they've had, but they've made very steady progress. Following Dan, we're going to hear from Greg Nordin. Greg is the Director of Planning for the Rhode Island Public Transit Authority, and will, I'm sure, speak a little bit more to the opportunities with the Transit Master Plan coming up. Then we'll hear from Drew Flomer. Drew is the Principal Planner for the Division of Planning for the State of Rhode Island, and is looking at the types of policies that may be needed statewide to help communities that are looking to, and also guidance, planning guidance, for the communities that are looking to pursue transit-oriented development. And then finally, we're going to hear from Dr. Jeannette Michel, Assistant Professor of Architecture at Roger Williams University. And we've been working very closely with Roger Williams and with Housing Works Rhode Island and Grow Smart on a TOD study that it's been underway since January. It's going to be wrapping up next month. And we started with 9 communities that expressed interest in having their community looked at for a more in-depth study of the opportunities and the challenges of transit-oriented development. And we've narrowed it down to 5 that we actually have the capacity to do a deeper dive into. And so we're going to hear more about that and the opportunities that come from it. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan to get us started.